If you ever got out of a Volkswagen Golf feeling you could do with a bit more space, the answer is right here in the chiselled form of the Golf SV. Here the Wolfsburg brand has at last brought us a proper, purpose-built, family-sized 5-seat MPV that offers properly purposeful advantages to justify its premium over the standard hatchback model. It's Volkswagen's idea of what a Scenic or a C-Max should really be, and if you're buying in this segment and can afford something a little nicer, you could find it hard to resist. Designing an MPV People Carrier needs to amount to more than just raising the roof height of a conventional family hatchback and giving it a different badge. Volkswagen knows that now, after a sobering experience with their slow-selling Golf Plus model, launched in 2005 and updated in 2010. That car was supposed to be the brand's answer to 5-seat people carriers like Renault Scenic and Ford C-Max, contenders that were successful because they were properly developed to offer families significantly more. Constrained by restrictive, old-fashioned turn-of-the-century underpinnings, the disappointing Golf Plus couldn't deliver that kind of proposition. Its replacement, though, certainly can. Welcome to the Golf SV. The SV moniker stands for sports van, a name the importers here understandably didn't much like, hence its shortening to a couple of simple letters. True, some utilitarian MPVs are little more than refurbished vans, Volkswagen's own Caddy Life model, for example. This one, though, is a long way from being an LCV. By the same token, it also sits some distance from sportiness. What buyers do get, though, at last from Volkswagen, is a proper 5-seat compact MPV in the Scenic or C-Max mould that borrows from its conventional Golf stablemate, but thanks to the high-tech flexibility of the group's clever modern-day MQB platform, doesn't now have to sit on that car's restricted wheelbase. It's freer, in other words, to do its own thing, just as, after purchase, Volkswagen hopes potential buyers will be. The niche here is an admittedly narrow one. If a standard Golf isn't enough, but you still want something pretty compact, the Volkswagen brand can already sell you their straightforward Golf Estate, their 7-seater Touran small people mover, or the van-derived Caddy Life MPV I mentioned earlier. None of these cars, though, have the dynamic style, flair and driveway cred necessary for widespread acceptance in the Scenic and C-Max class. In contrast, from its launch here in the summer of 2014, the Golf SV has always claimed to offer exactly that. It's still not the largest car of its kind, but claims to be the classiest. Let's put it to the test. Surely this car can't handle exactly like the Golf hatch it's based upon? After all, it's got about 80mm more length and width, 120mm more height, and it's about 120 kilograms heavier. You'd have to notice all of that around the corners, wouldn't you? Really though, you don't. I'm not saying there's no difference at all. You do get a touch more body roll through the tighter bends, but in truth, it's not terribly significant. Or perhaps it's just that your mind is distracted from the issue by the surprisingly sharp way that this SV turns into the bends. Now, credit for this goes to a standard XDS electronic differential lock that automatically brakes the inner wheel through each tight curve just before it loses traction, sharpening turn-in and firing you from bend to bend. The rival Ford C-Max uses a similar system and overall remains a slightly more rewarding steer, though the differences aren't great. In fact, they're not very noticeable at all if you're able to stretch to one of the more powerful SV variants that can, at extra cost, be ordered with a DCC dynamic chassis control system that aims to very effectively deal with that touch of extra body roll I mentioned. Now, DCC offers specifically tuned sport and comfort options depending on how you want to drive. Modes that you select from the driver profile selection system that you'll find on all but the most basically trimmed versions of this car. Another welcome feature borrowed from the ordinary Golf. Without the DCC ride control package, this profile selection setup's 4 standard settings, these are Eco, Sport, Normal and Individual, merely allow you to alter throttle response, steering feel, air conditioning efficiency, and on automatic models, gear shift timings. Still, even this is enough to change the character of your Golf SV to better suit the mood that you're in and the road that you're on. The other thing that fundamentally changes the character of this car is something over which owners will have less control. As it has with more ordinary versions of this Golf, Volkswagen, a little meanly, has decided to save a few pennies by equipping all mainstream versions with an old-tech torsion beam suspension setup that can give you a bit of a fidgety ride at low speeds over poor surfaces. Now, to avoid this and get a proper modern multi-link system, like the one that you'd find across the range in, say, a rival Ford C-Max, you have to stretch to the very pokiest petrol or diesel Golf SV variants. That's a little disappointing, but the engine range on offer isn't. The 2 power plants I just referred to, the only ones that you can order with that DCC ride control system, offer 150 PS. Buyers choosing between either a 2-litre TDI diesel or a 1.4-litre TSI petrol unit. Now, with a pair, I'd always go for the diesel, primarily because you don't have to have it in a pricey top GT trim level that forces you into a car with an unnecessarily firm suspension setup. In any case, the 2-litre TDI isn't even much slower than its direct petrol equivalent, the 9.2 second 0 to 62 mile an hour showing less than half a second tardier. Both cars max out at 132 miles an hour. Most Golf SV customers, though, won't need that kind of performance. Volkswagen tells us that nearly all of them plump for the 110 PS version of its trusty 1.6-litre TDI diesel. That's the variant I'm trying here. You can see why it's so popular, that unit offering a persuasive blend of decently perky performance and 70 miles to the gallon efficiency. In one of these, you can expect 62 miles an hour from rest to occupy 11.3 seconds en route to 119 miles an hour, though I should point out that these are figures only just superior to those returned by the 90 PS version of this same engine. The other power plant choices are all petrol driven and continue the all-turbo theme. A couple of 1.2-litre TSI units prop up the range, respectively developing either 85 or 110 PS. Personally, I'd avoid these. The feebler variant, which takes over 13 seconds to get to 62 miles an hour, will quickly run out of puff when your Golf SV is heavily loaded. The pokier one cuts that time by over 2.5 seconds, but there's not much point in buying it because for only a little more, you could get yourself a bigger capacity 1.4-litre 125 PS TSI petrol engine that's a more satisfying choice all round. Here, the 62 mile an hour sprint takes 9.9 seconds on the way to 124 miles an hour. If you want to please your Volkswagen salesperson, tell them that this car looks like a Golf. That is, after all, just the point, given that the last thing the stylists wanted was the high-roofed toy town awkwardness of the old Golf Plus. Though this car is just as tall, its proportions are far more carefully considered, with aesthetic tricks like a glasshouse extending fifth side window and bonnet lengthening creases, preserving the smartly conservative look of Volkswagen's best-selling family hatch. I also like these so-called winglets. Struts in the lower area of the bumper that act like small wings, framing the middle air intake and the fog lights. Moving around the car, your eyes follow a strong character shoulder line that runs through the door handles and culminates in aerodynamically optimised two-part rear tail lamps. If you owned an old Golf Plus, you'll note that the screen these sit below is much wider and is capped off by a neat, sleek roof spoiler. So far, so good. The important part, though, as ever, is the bit you can't see. In this case, the high-tech MQB modular transverse matrix chassis that's transformed the way that Volkswagen's developers could go about designing this car. Its Golf Plus predecessor had to cope with the restrictions of exactly the same wheelbase as an ordinary Golf hatch, thanks to a fixed floor plan the Wolfsburg spanner men couldn't tamper with. The 7th generation Golf model's far more modern MQB underpinnings are very different, their flexibility enabling the wheelbase of this car to grow by 50mm over that of its standard hatch counterpart. Now that's made all the difference, both to the looks and to the practicality and space that you can expect once inside. Let me start to try and paint that picture for you. In terms of overall size, what we've ended up with is an inevitably bigger car than the old Golf Plus, though interestingly the height is pretty much the same. We've also got ourselves a car that sits plumb in the middle of the 7th generation Golf body style lineup, with a 4.34 metre total length that makes an SV 83mm longer than the ordinary hatch, but 224mm shorter than a Golf Estate. So, enough with the stats. What does it all mean? Well, a very practical car indeed is the short answer. Some of the motoring magazines have moaned that this SV doesn't have quite as much luggage space as its direct rivals, but that's a bit misleading, as it's a comment that applies to a seats-folded total cargo configuration you'll hardly ever use. In terms of the standard boot, that thing that you'll use every day, the capacity that this Volkswagen can offer is actually class-leading, 590 litres, with this neat sliding rear bench pushed right forward, which is 30% more than a Golf hatch can offer, and only a fraction less than you'd get in a Golf Estate. Now, even if you need to use that bench for adults and activate the 180mm of travel that it offers going backwards, there's still 500 litres available. That's 76 litres more than a comparably configured version of the old Golf Plus, and importantly, significantly more than you get in a Ford C-Max. It's a decently shaped and very usable cargo area too, thanks to a repositionable boot floor that can be set to various heights, including one flush to a boot lip designed to be accessibly close to the ground. The flexibility continues once you fold this backrest forward, something that's possible to do in a 40-20-40 configuration that's very useful if all you want to do is poke long items like skis through from the boot. Completion of the folding process, though, reveals a disappointment, namely the lack of the kind of flexibility that you get at this point in a rival Scenic or C-Max, both of which allow for the rear bench to be tumbled forward and, if necessary, totally removed. If you've owned either of those two competitors, you may also notice the point I alluded to earlier, namely that the seats folded capacity that you get from this Golf SV is less. The 1,520 litre total figure, around 15% less than you get in a C-Max and around 20% less than you could expect in a Scenic. If removal van ramifications matter to you, then that might be an issue. But I'm guessing that for most potential family owners, it won't be. After all, how many Scenic or C-Max owners have ever taken out their rear seats or completely used all of the capacity their cars could offer? Very few, I'm guessing. No, what's important here is that the luggage area is now quite sufficient for class competitiveness, the 1,795mm total length being 35mm more than the old Golf Plus could offer. It's also beautifully trimmed, these neat flaps that smooth over the not quite flat floor area being a nice touch. Now, if you're occasionally likely to need to maximise carriage capacity, then make sure that you order your SV with the optional fold forward front passenger seat. That'll significantly increase your potential loading length to over 2.5 metres. So yes, that kayak, that bicycle or that surfboard will certainly fit. On to the driving experience you get from a seat up front. Enter in through these wide opening doors and there's a low enough hip point to make getting comfortable easier for older owners. That's despite the fact that in proper MPV style, you do sit a little higher up here than you would in a Golf hatch or estate. I'm guessing that the slightly more commanding view of the road ahead that this provides will be a major SV selling point. And behind the wheel? Well, this isn't, apparently, the same dashboard that you get in an ordinary Golf hatchback. But you'd never know that, primarily because all of the elements embedded into it are exactly the same. This is, of course, no bad thing, and the design with its soft touch finishes, its classy gloss black inlays and clear instruments you view through a sculpted 3-spoke leather trimmed steering wheel remains class leading, certainly far nicer and more upmarket than you'd get in a rival Ford or Renault. The quality of the materials used is better and build quality from the Wolfsburg factory more solid. This being one of the relatively few compact Volkswagen models still actually built in Germany. True, you could say that this cabin lacks the high-tech ambience of, say, a rival Citroën C4 Picasso, but that's not to say it doesn't have its sophisticated touches. Take the Bluetooth-compatible infotainment touchscreen system, controlled from a display either 5.8 inches in size, as here, or 8 inches in size. If you specify the Discover satellite navigation system as an option, you'll get the 8-inch one. Now, it can work with a neat proximity sensor touch system that hides certain menus or controls until your finger's near the screen, at which point they suddenly appear ready to be operated. As for practicality, well, yes, that's been well thought through too. There's this centre armrest with its integrated storage compartment. You've got the usual couple of cup holders with a retaining strap next to them. There's a storage bin in the upper part of the dashboard, provided you don't order the optional Dynaudio sound system, and properly sized door bins, capable of holding a 1.5 litre bottle or two in the front, and a 1 litre one back there in the rear. Not quite so well shaped are these rather small underseat drawers. There's also a compartment by the steering column, a lidded box in front of the gear lever, and an air-conditioned glove box, the size of which is slightly constrained by the CD player within it. And in the rear, well, it's true that in a rival Scenic, a C-Max or a C4 Picasso, you've the option of taking out the middle seat to free up more space for the two outer passengers. That's not an option here. But then, how often would you really want it to be? Of more significance for me is the fact that if you're a middle seat occupant back here, your legroom will be considerably inhibited by this prominent fixed transmission tunnel, something that seems rather superfluous on what is, after all, a front-wheel drive car. On the positive side, most models get these useful fold-out seat-back tables. Plus, more importantly, headroom's good and can be improved by the included seat reclining function. Likewise, your legroom can be similarly enhanced to almost limousine levels by the fact that this rear bench can be slid backwards and forwards throughout a travel of 180 millimetres. Lovely. If you find the £2,000 premium Volkswagen charges for this SV model over its conventional Golf hatchback a little sobering, then you might find it more comfortable to note that one of these will only set you back a few £100s more than a far less flexible Golf estate. Whatever your perspective though, you won't be expecting this to be amongst the cheapest choices in its segment, nor is it. Overall, potential SV buyers will be looking at a pricing span that sits in the £19,000 to £27,000 bracket. In other words, they're going to need to be people fully bought into this car's promises of extra space and flexibility. If you are, then the other choices you'll have to make are fairly straightforward. Now, you'll probably want a diesel. 80% of buyers do. And if so, I'm expecting that you'll no doubt rightly think the entry-level 90 PS 1.6 litre TDI unit too feeble and the flagship 150 PS 2 litre TDI model too expensive. If so, that leaves you only with this 110 PS 1.6 litre TDI variant that almost everyone seems to want, a car that requires a budget of around £22,000, or a little more than that if you want to get it in frugally minded Blue Motion form. Now, if you are prepared to go against the grain and plump for petrol power, the 125 PS version of the 1.4 litre TSI unit is a very good choice. It'll save you around £1,000 over this volume diesel variant, and it's hardly any more expensive than the only 1.2 litre TSI model with enough puff to be worth considering, that with 110 PS. Whatever your choice, from all the engines that I've just mentioned, there's the option of DSG auto transmission for a premium of around £1,400. So, how does this model's pricing stack up as a value proposition in the family hatch-based 5-seat MPV segment? Well, as ever, it depends upon your point of reference. If that happens to be a car like Fiat's 500L, well, you'll save around 20% over the cost of an SV. But then the Fiat is 25% smaller inside and has a feebler range of engines. No, you really need to compare apples with apples, or to get away from that analogy, this Volkswagen against the 3 market segment leaders it was primarily designed to shape up against: Ford's C-Max, Citroen's C4 Picasso and Renault Scenic. Now, of this trio, you might feel inclined to dismiss the Renault first. After all, it costs similar money to this SV and relies heavily on the standard provision of satellite navigation to offset the fact that, despite several facelifts, it's a very old design. 2 better choices, you might think, are the C-Max and the C4 Picasso. Now, both are relatively fresh to market and both seem apparently better value, undercutting their typical direct Golf SV equivalents by anything between £1,000 and £2,000, depending on the model that you're looking at. Against that, though, you've got to consider this Volkswagen's extra quality, marginally lower running costs, and the slightly bigger boot it offers, with all the seats in place. Are there other directly comparable cars you could realistically consider in this corner of the market? Well, the answer is no, not really. The Mercedes B-Class is a similar sort of product, but is slightly smaller inside and requires another £2,000 model for model over the cost of an equivalent Golf SV. It's probably also worth me pointing out that for Golf SV money, Volkswagen also offers its 7-seat Touran model, though that's an older design with slightly higher running costs. Ultimately, as usual, it'll all come down to your personal priorities. If, having looked carefully at those priorities, you conclude that it is this Volkswagen that you really want, then there are a few decisions to make. First, how much do you prioritise driving dynamics? If that's key for you, remember that only the priciest top 150 PS petrol and diesel variants get a proper high-tech multi-link suspension setup. All other SV models must make do with an old-tech torsion beam system, which isn't quite as responsive and can get a bit fidgety at lower speeds on porous surfaces. Perhaps an even bigger issue, though, is the fact that it's only these 2 pricey variants that can be ordered with the brand's excellent DCC dynamic chassis control system that enables you to tweak the ride to suit the kind of driving that you're doing. Now, this adds an extra comfort mode to the driver profile selection system that's fitted to all but entry-level trim SV variants. Without DCC, the driver profile package can only alter throttle and steering response, or when on automatic models it alters gear shift timing too. Adding DCC to it properly completes the whole thing. Overall, what I'm saying is that if you can afford either a 1.4 TSI 150 PS or a 2-litre TDI 150 PS Golf SV variant, you'll get more driving experience options. But then I'm guessing that most potential buyers won't care very much about that. What I'd thoroughly advise against is opting for a model at the top of the trim hierarchy. That runs from S through SE to GT. GT, you see, gives you unnecessarily stiff suspension that really doesn't suit the car and isn't really worth the extra money, given that SE variants like this one offer everything you really need, including niceties like 16-inch alloy wheels, auto headlamps and wipers, and a leather-trimmed 3-spoke multifunction steering wheel. You also get basics like an alarm and a 12-volt boot-mounted socket that are surprisingly omitted from basic S spec. Mind you, that entry-level trim is otherwise pretty comprehensive, provided you've accepted that those cheapest S variants do without the cleverer safety stuff and the driver profile selection system that I mentioned earlier. What you do get on every model is the 5.8-inch composition media colour touchscreen, via which you can access an 8-speaker DAB radio, Bluetooth phone connectivity, and various ways to connect in things like iPods and SD cards. There's also a display in the middle of the instrument cluster that'll give you eco-driving tips, for example, advising you not to touch the accelerator on startup, and to shut the windows if the standard climatic semi-automatic air conditioning is on. This air conditioning, by the way, also cools the glove box to keep your chocolate bars and Coke cans from surrendering to the heat, while other key across-the-board features include roof rails, an electronic parking brake with an auto hold function that stops you from drifting backwards on uphill junctions, a multifunction computer, electric mirrors, and a variable height boot floor, under which you'll get a space-saver rear wheel, or at least you will if you don't choose the frugally minded Blue Motion variant. In an attempt to save an inconsequential few kilos, this fobs buyers off with one of those awful tyre repair kits instead. Options on most models include things like a panoramic tilting sliding sunroof, there's keyless entry and start, a park assist system that'll automatically steer you into tight spaces, xenon headlamps, a lovely ergo-active driver's seat that lightly massages you as you drive, and a thumping 10-speaker 400-watt Dynaudio sound pack. I'd also want the fold-forward front passenger seat, and I'd be tempted by the Discover satellite navigation system that I've been trying here, which works off a larger 8-inch colour infotainment touchscreen and can be upgraded to DVD 64GB hard drive status. You can also pay extra for high beam assist headlights that automatically dip themselves in the face of oncoming traffic, and a lane assist feature that stops dozy drivers from veering out of their lanes on the highway, and is packaged with a clever side scan blind spot monitor that stops you from dangerously pulling out to overtake in front of another car, and can even detect approaching traffic when you're backing out of a parking space. Talking of safety, well, I mentioned earlier that to really complete this car in that regard, you need to avoid entry-level S trim. Even that, though, gives you 5-star Euro NCAP standards of safety thanks to twin front, side and curtain airbags, plus a driver's knee bag. You also get ISOFIX child seat fastenings, anti-whiplash head restraints, the usual electronic driver aids for braking, traction and stability control, plus an award-winning automatic post-collision braking system that brakes the vehicle after any impact to substantially reduce the chance of you hitting anything else. Most potential customers, though, will probably think it worth the extra cash to trade up to the plusher variants that include a lot more. 5 main systems, in fact. First, there's a driver alert setup that monitors your driving reactions as you travel and, if necessary, prompts you to stop for a restorative coffee, which is useful for conceivably you might find your attention wandering on a longer trip when using the adaptive cruise control system, able to automatically adapt your highway speed to that of the surrounding traffic, if necessary, even slowing you to a standstill and starting you off again. Now, the setup also incorporates what Volkswagen calls front assist, which during faster progress is able to warn the driver of an impending collision. City emergency braking does much the same sort of thing in urban driving at lower speeds of under 18 miles an hour. Either way, if an accident looks likely, the driver will be warned. If no response is forthcoming, the car will then automatically brake itself to reduce the severity of any resulting accident. Once you have passed that point of no return and an accident is almost inevitable, a clever pre-crash preventative occupant protection system instantly clicks in, pre-tensioning your seatbelt while automatically closing the windows and, if fitted, the electric sunroof to give you the best chance of surviving the coming impact. First, let's get the blue motion issue out of the way. All Golf SV models use so-called blue motion technology, which means that they come with brake energy regeneration, which reclaims energy that would otherwise be lost under braking. And they get a start-stop system that cuts the engine when you don't need it, stuck in traffic or waiting at the lights. There is, though, only one fully fledged proper blue motion model, which goes several steps further in pursuit of ultimate efficiency. Now, it's based on the volume 1.6 litre TDI 110 diesel engine and gets lower suspension, low rolling resistance tyres and a sleeker front end, courtesy of a modified radiator grille and air intake. All this is complemented by a whole range of engineering improvements aimed at making the mechanicals more efficient by reducing internal friction, implementing on-demand use and shortening things like the warm-up phase. There are weight-saving measures too, though amongst these is the irritating deletion of the space-saver spare wheel in lieu of a fiddly tyre repair kit. That last issue might put me off ordering my Golf SV in full blue motion guise. Well, that and this eco variant's slight price premium. On the other hand, though, it's difficult to argue with the running cost improvements that ordering this frugally focused model will bring. Choose it and your combined cycle fuel figure will improve from the already quite impressive 72.4 miles to the gallon that you get in the standard 90 and 110 PS 1.6 litre diesel variants to as much as 78.5 miles to the gallon. And your CO2 reading will improve from 101 grams per kilometre to a tax-busting 95 grams per kilometre. If you want the 2-litre TDI 150 Golf SV with its more sophisticated suspension, there is, as you'd expect, a running cost penalty to pay, but it's not too onerous. This model returns 64.2 miles to the gallon and 110 grams per kilometre of CO2. On to petrol power, consideration of which brings home the truism that in a big car, a small engine won't necessarily prove to be any more economical. So it is here with the feeble 1.2 litre TSI petrol models not noticeably any cheaper to run than their much more satisfying 1.4 litre TSI petrol stablemates. All manage just over 50 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle in a span that runs from the 50.4 miles to the gallon that you get in the 1.4 TSI 150 to the 56.5 miles to the gallon reading managed by a 1.2 litre TSI 85 PS variant with almost half the power. There's a bit more difference between these two engines when it comes to CO2 readings. The 1.2s deliver either 115 or 117 grams per kilometre, depending on your choice between 85 or 110 PS versions, while the 1.4s manage 125 or 130 grams per kilometre, depending on whether you want 125 or 150 PS. I'll also say a word about the DSG Auto gearbox here too, namely that it's very frugal. A 6-speeder on the 2-litre TDI, but with 7 speeds when fitted across the rest of the range. Now, one of the reasons why it's so efficient is that a clever coasting feature is included, which at motorway cruising speeds disengages the gear to allow the engine to idle. As a result, fuel and CO2 figures for petrol DSG automatic Golf SV models are actually slightly better than their manual equivalents. The DSG automatic still comes with a slight penalty though if you opt for one of the diesels. Of course, all the clever software in the world won't help your running costs very much if, as a driver, you don't also do your part. Helping in this regard are features like the gear shift indicator provided on the dash and the suggestions offered up by the eco driving function that's included within the trip computer menus between the main dials on the dash. If your car is fitted with the driver profile selection system, you'll also want to remember to keep that in its most efficient eco mode on a regular basis. What else? Residual values? Well, these should be significantly higher than you could expect from direct rivals like Renault's Scenic, Citroen's C4 Picasso and Ford's C-Max, which should offset a good part of the upfront price premium that your local Volkswagen dealer will require for Golf SV ownership. There's a choice of fixed or flexible servicing plans depending on whether your car will be covering less than 10,000 miles a year. And insurance groupings are relatively affordable. Starting with petrol power, you're talking Group 9E for the 1.2 TSI 85 PS and Group 14E for the 110 PS version of this engine. The 1.4 litre TSI variants, meanwhile, range between Group 14E to 18E. Onto diesels. The volume 1.6 litre TDI models are either 11E or 13E, but if you go for a 2 litre TDI variant, that of course rises to either 17E or 19E. There's a 3-year, 60,000 mile warranty. I don't know about you, but I'd need a very good reason to buy a compact MPV with fewer than 7 seats. Here's a very good reason. The class, style and quality on offer here are certainly very tempting compensations for the absence of those extra chairs. And if you have decided you can do without the additional pews, an SV certainly stacks up very well against the other potential 5-seat solutions on offer for families seeking more flexibility than an ordinary Golf or Focus family hatch could offer. Do you really want the mundanity of an estate or a converted van? The rather self-conscious funkiness of a Qashqai-style crossover? Or the maternity unit practicality of, say, a Scenic or a C-Max? Here's a slightly different way to go. A proper Golf that at last is also the kind of proper people carrier its Golf Plus predecessor never was. True, other 5-seater MPVs can offer you slightly more space and seat fumbling flexibility, but the incremental benefits they deliver aren't really very significant. Mind you, the small price premium you have to pay for Golf SV ownership, maybe. But then you'd expect that from a better quality product. Overall, this is a car that adds a dash of desirability to the business of owning what is, at the end of the day, nothing more than a practical family tool. It's about time that Volkswagen showed us what it's really capable of in this segment. The result is a car you could be proud of.